Most people in Boston are proud of its leaders in our country's struggle for independence from the British Empire. Less well known is the story of people on the other side. Our guest has written a book about one of the most prominent loyalists in Massachusetts, a public servant, entrepreneur, and later historian in exile. The book is called Peter Oliver, The Loyalist Perspective on the American Revolution. We'd like to welcome the author, Louis Garafalo. Thank you very much, Chris. We'll talk about Peter Oliver. I mean, personality-wise, what was this man like?
From my research, I think it's a safe statement to say he was an outgoing, very vibrant guy, confident, willing to be the center of attention, enjoyed his status in the community. He was part of the upper crust socially elitist, from a wealthy family, people that were bred to lead, in their opinion. So a very vibrant and outgoing man.
Now talk about the difference between his camp and some of the others, because in the other camp there are other people who were successful, they're kind of wealthy too, yes. But his set was different.
Yes, the Oliver family was very connected to the Hutchinson family, and in a different world we'd be driving on the Thomas Hutchinson Parkway and the Peter Oliver Bridge. Peter Oliver's older brother Andrew and Thomas Hutchinson, the last governor of the Commonwealth of the colony, married sisters. And the families were interrelated. Peter Oliver, my subject, son, married Thomas Hutchinson's daughter, and very interconnected. They believed in holding offices and having those offices accumulated within certain families. The Hancocks and the Otises and later the Adams, they were of the same nature, but they were just not part of the Hutchinson-Oliver faction.
Now, he also made his money by running a business. And one of the things that fascinates me in this book is that he really had his finger on the sort of a growth strain in the colonies. Talk about his business.
He was a very successful entrepreneur. Basically left the family business, moved to Middleborough, where I'm from, spent 30 years there, and started a iron slitting mill, they called it, rolling mill. Basically, he had the technology to heat iron, roll it out, and make iron products, most notably artillery pieces. Also had a grist mill, a brickyard. Making of nails was very common.
Because more people needed houses, right?
People did their own construction and they needed nails. So very successful and very much interested in technology. When he was in exile in England, he ended up settling in Birmingham and came to know very well a man named James Watt, who invented the steam engine. Right, yeah. So he had a very deep interest in things mechanical.
Right. Now he also had the side where he was a public servant, sort of like a judge, and you know, and I'm reading your book about this, and I could see how you know, there's work involved, there's some stress involved, and not a lot of additional money necessarily.
No. First of all, to be appointed a judge is a little different then than it is now. You basically just get an appointment, political appointment. He was a judge, which did give him an opportunity to travel the colony quite a bit. And he, in my opinion, might have been the only loyalist that actually had the connection to individuals and people like Thomas Hutchinson were socially removed, but Oliver was at a ground level. He probably employed, I'm guessing, 25 to 50 people in his industry, and he traveled the colony and he went into courthouses and he had a chance to actually get a sense that, hey, something's going on out here. And those of us that are, you know, in our unique social enclave in Boston, like the Hutchinsons, you know, we're just not going to hear about it. But in none of my research could I find any laments from Peter Oliver, any thought that, hey, you know, there really is something happening in the heartland of the colony, and he might have been the only one that could have got access to that kind of ground information and then sold it to his social circle that there is something happening in the colony.
Well, he did have a different perspective on things, and of course, a lot of us from grade school were taught that, you know, this was a war about taxation without representation.
Yes.
But as your book points out, one of the main reasons for these taxes were, you know, the growth of the colonies.
Right. Well, the 30-second version would be that what we call the French and Indian War was a European war, the 100 Years' War. Britain wins, and Britain, in the process of winning, bankrupts itself, essentially. It needs revenue, and hence we get the Stamp Act, and we later get the taxes on teas, the things we know. The taxation without representation was a little bit of a misnomer in that in England, not everybody was represented. There was no individual vote. So the colonies actually had very little tax, very little taxation. And, had things been a little different, we might be celebrating the 100th anniversary of our independence. We would have been a Commonwealth of Britain. I think it was very clear as population was growing that clearly at some point the colonies were going to be independent. And I would argue that in many respects the average person, they already were independent. They never had any direct contact with anybody from England. It wasn't an impediment in their lives. In fact, one of the points I make in the book is that we tend to take history from that period and, we go to Columbus and then we go to Thanksgiving and then we go to the Boston Tea Party. Well, in that 150-year period, there was a lot that happened. Essentially, it was the slow decoupling of the colonies from their English roots. The colonies were actually already independent.
Well, one of the other things that goes on here is the way people become polarized. I mean, we might be happy with how things turned out, but there was a time where you had to take a stand. You could not be in the middle. And what about Oliver's decision?
Yeah, very much so. In fact, John Adams is famously quoted as saying that a third of the people were for the revolution, a third were opposed to it, and a third were in the middle. Just leave me alone. I don't want to make a choice. I think that very much was the case. Oliver was unabashedly pro-English. He thought that the British system of government was the best thing ever invented, and nobody in their right mind would want anything different. And that people like himself, the concept of a gentleman, people that are essentially born into wealth, bred, educated, and are meant to lead. He subscribed to that theory 100%. But the average person that just said, I'm worried about my animals mating and getting enough water for the corn, and can I get my wife one of those pewter candlesticks this year? Their life was unaffected by whether they were British or not. And I'm not sure what I would have been. Many people that were later considered to be Tories, essentially all they really were was, I want order. I don't want chaos. I don't want the mob to rule. And there was a real legitimate fear that, hey, what we have, we're going to appreciate it later when these rebels take over. And we better be careful.
Well, they did take over, and I think they settled down a bit too. So if people want to get some more information about this book, what's the best way to do that, Lou?
Best way to get information on this book is it's available on Amazon.com. It's available both in paper and in Kindle versions. So it's easy to order, and hopefully brings a perspective that people say, I never was taught that.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris.
Garafalo, the author of Peter Oliver, The Loyalist Perspective on the American Revolution.